If you saw the last video, you'll know that I had a new oil cooler fitted to my Astra VXR, which failed on the drive home pretty much within a few hours of being fitted, and started mixing oil and coolant. I bypassed that cooler, so it's just running the front mounted aftermarket oil cooler now, but I still need to physically remove the rear cooler from the car and fit a bypass bar, for which the inlet manifold has to come off. And this is the same process if you're fitting an upgraded inlet manifold, replacing your stock one, replacing the gasket for whatever reason, or doing the oil cooler like I am. So feel free to follow these instructions for any of those.
To start, I'm unplugging the throttle body, removing the evap valve from the top of the inlet manifold, and undoing the breather that connects the throttle body to the rocker cover. Next, I unplugged the map sensor, undid the hose clamps on either end of this boost pipe, and removed it from the car. Now there's nothing attached to the top hat or the throttle body, we can remove the 4 screws holding them onto the inlet manifold to give us access to the manifold. On the AirTech top hat kit on my car, these are 5mm cap head hex bolts, and for the 2 on the right that kind of sit under the top hat, it's easiest to just use an Allen key, as I found my 3/8 inch ratchet just wouldn't fit.
Right, so with the top hat and the throttle body out of the way, what else have we got to undo? So I've seen people undo the ECU bracket. I'll let you know later if that is required. It doesn't look like it's bolted to the inlet manifold, from what I can see. So that looks fine. Maybe that's just to get more room, I don't know. But next up, so the fuel rail, there seems to just be these 2 screws. And then we'll probably just move that out of the way, which I've seen petrol-led VXR do. This will probably turn out to be in the way, this breather pipe, so I'll probably take that off. Then the wiring loom goes here, so there's this one which goes to, oh, might be for BCS or something, so we can unplug that one there, but all of this stuff will stay connected, unfortunately, which might make it a bit tricky to move the fuel rail out of the way, but we'll see. Should just flip up onto here and be nice and clear of everything. This pipe, which appears to have a sensor on it that's not plugged into anything. I'm on a aftermarket standalone ECU, so maybe that's just a difference in my loom and a stock VXR one, but no clue, to be honest. So that needs to be undone from the inlet manifold. Oh yeah, the last thing is the alternator bracket. Should be able to just undo it from this side and slide that all out from under it once we get the inlet manifold studs undone. By the way, the reason the fuel rail has to come off is to get to those, like directly in line with it. If I go far enough back here, you can't see them. And there's this alternator bracket on the back as well by the looks of it. So that should be everything. There's a ground here too on the inlet manifold. There might have been more on a stock setup again, but my loom will be a bit different to yours unless you're running the ECU Master EMU Black conversion. For example, that down there on the inlet manifold might also be one.
Before removing the fuel rail in the injectors, I pulled off the vacuum line from the fuel pressure regulator, disconnected the breather that goes to my catch can to get a bit of extra room, and removed the vacuum reference for the brake booster from the inlet manifold, along with one last vacuum line. Here I'm unclipping this plug that I think goes to the boost control solenoid on the front of the engine, just to give all the wires on the fuel rail a little bit of extra wiggle room when we remove that. I put the retaining clip back on the plug so that I don't lose it, and I removed a zip tie that was holding my wiring loom to the alternator bracket, again for more wiggle room. Now we can remove the fuel rail with the injectors still attached, and just place these off to the side. This saves us a load of time disassembling stuff and unplugging injectors when we could just move it out of the way. Of course, being careful not to touch and damage the tips of the injectors. Now, the inlet manifold should be completely exposed with nothing in the way of getting it off, except the alternator brackets and ECU ground. Now we can remove the copper nuts that are holding on the inlet manifold, and it should just come out.
see if it's possible to do this one-handed. Unless I'm missing something. Is this? Oh, that one might be holding it down actually. Very weird that there's just one normal bolt in the end of it. Take two. Yeah, that's better. So, that does want to come off them studs. But yeah, now I see why people remove the alternator bracket fully, at least this one, because obviously that's stopping it from coming off these studs on this end. Okay, so if you ignore what I just said, it looks like, see if I can do this one-handed, if you just remove the alternator bracket that goes here, the long one, you can lever this whole thing out, and I think over these rear studs, let's see. Oh, look at that. She's off, and she's falling down the back of the engine. Oh, there we go. So, that is me wishing I bought a Klassen to put on while that's off. It's not a huge amount of effort. I won't be sort of crying at having to do it a second time, but certainly it would be nice. I just, to be honest, don't have the money. Like, I've spent, you know, £2 on a ported head and all the rest of the stuff that got done to it, and then had the coolant and oil mixing problem, and I just need to get out on tracking it and run it as it is and actually enjoy it and get some of my money's worth if I can. But yeah, now I'm going to have to wait till tomorrow, which should just be like 2 screws and all the pipes attached to it. I need to unzip tie the other end of these from my chassis leg where I attached them out of the way so they didn't catch on anything while I was driving it, because these are not connected to the oil system of the car anymore, as you'll have seen in the last video. Problem is, if you look where the coolant line to this goes to the reservoir. If you disconnect this, all the coolant in the reservoir is going to get dumped out of the car, and all the coolant in the heater matrix as well. Regardless, it's going to make a mess no matter what I do. The best thing to do would be to open up the radiator drain bung, drop the coolant, and then once the bottle is empty, take this off. The problem is I've been reusing the Doughty seal washer for this repeatedly, and it's had about 5 coolant changes because the coolant was full of oil. So the rubber seal inside the metal ring is shot. It's actually fallen off. I kept just putting it back in. So I've ordered a set of metric ones, hoping that it's metric, off Amazon. They're coming tomorrow. I should have really just ordered them yesterday because they'd be here by now with the 1 PM delivery. But yeah, before I can get the oil cooler off and drain the coolant and stuff, I would like to have a fresh washer for the radiator bung, because it was dripping a little bit, I think, and there's a chunk out of it, and putting it back on is just asking to lose my coolant. So I will cover up the inlet valves for the night, put the injectors where they're not going to get crushed when I shut the bonnet, and leave it like that for today, and come back tomorrow morning with a fresh set of eyes, take the oil cooler off, fit the TIGWorks bypass, and put it back together. Right, so I've got everything I need now. Been Halford's picked up some coolant, got Doughty washers for the radiator bung, which you won't need on a stock car. It's just a little plastic bung, but on mine I've got the Pro Alloy cooler, which takes these. Finally topped up on brake cleaner, never seem to have enough of this, and driveway cleaner, because the amount of coolant and oil stains I've put on this drive in the last few weeks is insane. So I'll probably do that at some point this weekend. So without further ado, I'm going to get one side of the car jacked up, take this wheel off so we can remove one end of the oil cooler lines, which I already did, but they are zip tied to the chassis leg to stop them dangling about while I was driving. So you'll need to unbolt them. I just need to unzip tie mine, and then we can drain the coolant and get the oil cooler off and the inlet manifold refitted.
fitted a new washer and refitted the coolant bung, ready to refill the car with coolant, but then it was time to get back to disassembling stuff. 2 of the 5 coolant hoses that go onto the oil cooler sit underneath this little bracket, so I removed that and unplugged the coolant temp sensor, just to get a little more access for my vice grips to remove those stupid OEM style pipe clamps. Really, one of these days I should just buy the right tool for those. That being said, due to the proximity of everything, even this Jubilee was hard to undo. I got the coolant pipe off in the end though, and there's the one to the heater matrix, the one to the coolant bottle, and the 2 at the other end still to be done.
Right, so this one that goes from the oil cooler down there, under this little coolant thing, to the reservoir was almost impossible to get off because of where the hose clamp is sat. So what I've done instead is just took it off the res, and I'll remove it from the cooler off the car and reattach it to the new cooler and then drop it in that way. Should be so much easier than messing about with these horrible factory style pipe clamps. So that's 3 off. The last ones are, let's see if we can point this right, those 2 on the far end, which should be really easy to get to with the inlet manifold off. I would never want to do this with the inlet manifold on. I've heard people say you can, especially with an EDS, but yeah, not for me. I would refuse. It's just not worth the effort. One off.
At this point, I snipped the zip tie that was holding the free end of the oil cooler oil lines to my subframe, where I had affixed them after removing them, but obviously if yours are still attached, you'll need to remove them from the sandwich plate above the oil filter, which looks like this. And now, after removing the 2 screws on the bottom of it, the oil cooler is free.
What a pain that was. That was the worst bit by far. Yeah, finally getting there. So now it's time to fit the TIGWorks bypass bar.
I was surprised to find it took twice as long to detach the water lines from the oil cooler as it did to actually remove the entire inlet manifold. But with that out of the way, I could lower the car back down to give me better access to the back of the engine to fit this shiny TIGWorks bypass bar. The quality of the materials and the welds on this is pretty spot on, and I can see why these are the go-to for aftermarket bits for the VXRs. When fitting the bypass bar, I originally did the coolant lines first on this end, thinking that that would be an easy way to hold it in place while I got these cap head screws that it comes with bolted in. But in the end, it turned out to be way too difficult to wrestle the pipe into place to get the screws to line up with the hoses on. So I pushed the hoses out of the way, bolted the pipe to the engine, and then levered the hoses over with a set of picks, which took about all of the force that I could possibly apply behind the engine at such a weird angle. It definitely beat the half an hour I wasted trying to get the screws to line up with the hoses already attached though the first time around. After getting the 3 hoses on the other end in, I remembered to plug in the coolant temp sensor, and then it was time to refit the inlet manifold using a brand new factory Vauxhall gasket from Courtenay Sport. The copper nuts are fitted back onto the studs, first nipped up hand tight, and then torqued to 22 Nm starting with the middle 2, and then working your way out in a star pattern, like doing a rocker cover gasket or a head. With the inlet manifold refitted, just as easy as that, it's time to refit the alternator brackets to it, and then we can start reattaching the breather pipes and vacuum lines that we disconnected before. Now I'm very gently pushing the fuel injectors back in, making sure they're all lined up with the holes first so I don't damage the nozzles, and reattaching the vacuum line to the fuel pressure regulator. With the wiring back where it's supposed to be, I could redo this plug. And speaking of plugs, it's really important to remember to reattach all the grounds for the ECU that you had to disconnect to take the inlet manifold off. Otherwise, you'll be really confused when you get an engine management light and 10 different fault codes for different electrical issues all around the engine. Next, I bolted this bracket back on, which is just 4 little screws, and then it would be time to refit the top hat and the throttle body. Really, this is just the reverse of taking it all off. Here I'm reattaching the plug for the throttle body, and then the breather with the one-way valve that connects the throttle body to the rocker cover can also go back on.
Right, so now we're all back together apart from the map pipe and the breather to the catch can. There's a reason for that though. So this is the cable for tuning my standalone ECU. Runs down here behind the ABS pump into a bung into the cabin, and as you can see, it's kind of rusty, this connection. So the ECU came with this little pigtail thing, and this extra connection being in the engine bay that's not watertight eventually rusted, and now there's a comms issue with the ECU when using this cable but not when using any other cable. So with the map pipe off, it's a lot easier to get your hand in and replace that USB that goes behind this vac line. So I'm going to run a new one into the glove box. I need to take the glove box out for that though. Next little job I want to do is battery out again and take this washer bottle off, because you can see the pattern there. That is oily foam from before I bypassed the cooler and from all the coolant flushers. Really, I should have only changed this once I knew for certain I was in the clear. So this has to come out. I'm going to put it in a bucket in the bath or something and wash it with soapy water and bleach, hose it through just to get that residue out of there. And then finally, I haven't emptied this catch can, haven't needed to empty this catch can in a year and a half or something since I fitted it. So I'm gonna unbolt that from where it sat on the strut tower and tip that out into a waste oil jug that I've got sat in the garage. I think there's maybe a centimetre at the bottom of it, but this engine, even when it was freshly rebuilt and the rings hadn't bedded in, has never breathed heavily, and hopefully will never. So yeah, good idea to empty it at some point while the pipe's already off, but so far I have never actually needed to. So I'll crack on with those little jobs, then we can fill it up with coolant and finally give it a drive. Okay, actually giving that a shake, there's nothing in there. So, still, does not need emptying. Probably a sign the engine's in good health, or this AirTech catch can doesn't work. And I'm actively getting rained off as I speak, so I'll finish this another time, I guess.
While it rained, I brought my coolant bottle into the house for a nice bubble bath in hot water, soap and bleach, in the hopes that it would freshen up a little bit, but even after hosing it down, that didn't quite work out.
Soaked it in washing up liquid and bleach and run like 1 million litres of water through it with a hose pipe, and that is the end result. Slightly better, but still crap. Really, I'll just have to buy a third new bottle for this car at some point if I want it to be show spec, but it has got the leftover oil residue out of there. There's no line here where the water was sat anymore. It's just getting this top bit is not really possible because you can't shoot the water around corners. Maybe the jet washer would have done it, but I'm doing all that for the sake of another 15 quid washer bottle, so I'll replace it eventually. I've just got to do the data line for the ECU now and the mat pipe, and we're back in business.
I pulled the old USB cable for the ECU out from under the glove box and fed the new one through the hole that I had previously cut in the bung that sits behind the ABS pump in the engine bay. I pulled that out, plugged it into the ECU, and now we should be good to go for making map tweaks from inside the car without having to run a cable through the window. The last thing to go on is the map sensor and this boost pipe. Then we'll be able to top the coolant up and run the car up to temperature, bleed it, and we're good to go. I keep being lazy and pouring the coolant without a funnel, so I've made a bit of a mess, which I just cleaned up with some parts cleaner, sprayed around the top and the sides of the bottle.
And that's it now. Don't appear to be any leaks, just got to run it up to temperature like you've seen me do about 10 times in the last 2 videos, and we should be good to go. Let me just show you. As far as I can tell, I don't see any leaks from those pipes. Relatively clean coolant bottle, new wire, the ECU, and hopefully now a leak-free, mixing oil and coolant-free VXR. Right, so I've had the inlet manifold off, I've refitted it, fitted the bypass bar while it was off, bled the coolant, and it seems all good, to be honest. The car stopped steaming, it burnt off all of the coolant that was all over everything, and there doesn't seem to be any more steam, which to me, although it's hard to see under the inlet manifold to the new bypass bar, I keep wanting to say oil cooler, but since there's no new steam, I would assume there's no leaks. Certainly not enough to make the coolant level drop. If you liked the video, you know what to do, leave us a like, drop a comment for the algorithm, and subscribe to the channel to follow along with the rest of the stuff. We've got Vox valves in a couple of weeks, and I think I have to buy a ticket for that by the 6th. I'm not sure if I want to rush to do the big brake kit before then. That's probably not a good idea. but at least in the next month there should be a video on fitting the AP Racing brakes. And then start of October I'm planning to do a track day. But yeah, hopefully that's it for fixing the car for the foreseeable future at least. So this is the end of the video. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.
Living life, every day, late at night, not okay. All I want, and I pray, all I need are some better days. Fuck me, I'm looking in the mirror, so foggy, but I've never seen clearer. I don't really think anyone can save me, and honestly I'm not really sure I want saving. I like to be my own worst enemy. There's no risk if you don't try at anything, so I'ma just get buying everything. See you in the next life, have to be a better me. I don't think that my head's on straight, gotta flip it and grip it and go and get an X-ray.